A judge tried to fine Pam Bondi just for wearing a cross in court. Bad move. She didn't just fight back. She tore his argument apart, exposed his hypocrisy, and turned the entire courtroom against him. But that was just the beginning. When he tried to retaliate, she played her final card, and it was game over. You won't believe how this ends. Watch till the very last second. The fine that changed everything. Pam Bondi stepped into the Tampa courtroom, heels clicking against the cold marble floor. It was supposed to be a routine hearing, quick, clean, in and out. But the moment she crossed the threshold, she felt it. A shift in the air. A tension that hadn't been there a second ago. And then she saw him. Judge Alan Prescott. He sat perched on his bench, fingers drumming against the wood, sharp eyes locked on her. Not on her face. Not on her case file. But on the small gold cross resting just below her collarbone. Ms. Bondi, he said, his voice like steel on glass. Remove that cross. Pam barely reacted. Just gave him a slow blink, as if he'd asked her to remove her skin. I'm sorry. What? The cross, he repeated. It needs to go. Now. She tilted her head, fingers grazing the tiny pendant. Why? This is a court of law, not a place of worship. All religious symbols must be removed. Pam felt a flicker of something, annoyance? Amusement? It was hard to tell. So, wedding rings too? She asked. Or are those exempt? A ripple went through the courtroom. A cough. A shifting of feet. Prescott's jaw twitched. That's different. Is it? Pam folded her arms. Because last I checked, those are symbols of personal belief too. Or what about lapel pins? Awareness ribbons? You gonna start finding those next? A muscle in the judge's cheek jumped. This isn't a debate, Ms. Bondi. Remove it, or I'll fine you. And there it was. The moment. The choice. She could roll over, tuck the cross away, and move on with her day. Or she could make a stand. Pam smiled, slow and steady. I'll keep it, she said. Go ahead and fine me. Prescott's face darkened. He grabbed his gavel, slamming it down so hard it echoed. Very well, he snapped. Consider yourself fined. $500. A murmur spread through the room. Pam didn't flinch. She just reached into her bag, pulled out her checkbook, and started writing. Who do I make it out to? She asked, voice sugar sweet. Prescott didn't answer. His lips pressed into a thin, furious line. Pam tore the check free, walked up to the clerk's desk, and placed it down with a crisp slap. Then she turned back to the judge, meeting his glare with one of her own. I formally object, she said. First Amendment. Personal religious expression. Prescott exhaled through his nose. This is a courtroom, Ms. Bondi. You don't have the right to it. Oh, I absolutely do, she cut in. And I'm gonna prove it. The energy in the room shifted. Even the bailiff looked intrigued. Prescott leaned forward. You're making a mistake. Pam lifted a shoulder. Wouldn't be my first. She could see it in his face. The battle lines were drawn. And from the way he clenched his jaw, she knew one thing for sure. This was just getting started. When a judge picks the wrong fight, the weight of the $500 fine should have hit Pam Bondi like a slap. It didn't. If anything, it rolled right off her. She stood there, shoulders squared, check already written, while Judge Alan Prescott sat fuming on his bench. Pam had faced down worse than this. Political opponents, corrupt officials, high-profile cases with everything on the line. A judge throwing a tantrum over a cross? Please. But Prescott wasn't done. This is a court of law, Ms. Bondi, he said, his voice tight, controlled. Not a place for personal protests. Pam smirked. A protest? Oh, that's cute. Wearing a cross is a protest now. He exhaled through his nose, nostrils flaring. This is about decorum. Pam leaned on the defense table, tapping a nail against the wood. No, this is about you picking and choosing what's acceptable. If I were wearing a rainbow pin or a breast cancer awareness ribbon, would we be having this conversation? Prescott's silence was deafening. A few feet away, one of the clerks shifted in her seat. The bailiff glanced at the judge, then at Pam, then at the growing tension filling the room. People were paying attention now. Prescott leaned forward. Your defiance is disrupting these proceedings, Ms. Bondi. Pam let out a short laugh. Disrupting? The only thing I'm disrupting is your ability to make up rules on the fly. The judge's face darkened. He adjusted his robe, sitting up straighter as if that would somehow shift the balance of power back in his favor. This is my courtroom, he said, and you will comply with my orders. Pam held up her check and waved it slightly. I already paid your little fine. So what's your move now? You want to have me arrested? Make me an example. His fingers tightened around the gavel. For a split second, she could see him considering it, weighing the optics, the fallout. He wouldn't. He couldn't. But the fact that he even had to think about it? That told her everything. Pam tilted her head. I'm not the one making a scene here, Judge. Another murmur rolled through the courtroom. A few reporters sat in the back, notebooks out, pens hovering. They'd come for a routine hearing. Now, they had something much juicier. Prescott saw them too. His mouth pressed into a thin line. Fine, he snapped. You've made your point. Pam raised an eyebrow. Have I? Court is adjourned, he said sharply, slamming his gavel down so hard it echoed. Pam didn't move right away. She let the silence sit, thick and heavy, before she turned and walked out, slow, steady, every step deliberate. She didn't have to look back to know one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not even close. The moment she turned the tables, Pam Bondi wasn't the kind of person to let something slide, especially not when it reeked of hypocrisy. The courtroom doors had barely swung shut behind her when she pulled out her phone. She had research to do. If Judge Alan Prescott wanted to play games, she'd make damn sure he lost. She spent the next few hours buried in case law, flipping through decisions that had shaped the First Amendment. It didn't take long to find exactly what she needed: Tinker versus Des Moines, 1969, and West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnette, 1943. Two cases that made one thing crystal clear. People don't lose their constitutional rights just because they step into a government building. And that judge? He had just trampled all over hers. The next morning, Pam was back in court, early. When Prescott walked in, he barely glanced her way. Good. Let him think this was over. Let him think she'd learned her lesson. He settled into his seat, clearing his throat. Let's proceed. Pam stood. Actually, Your Honor, I have a legal matter to address first. Prescott's eyes flicked up, just a hint of irritation behind them. Ms. Bondi, this court. Tinker versus Des Moines, 1969, she said, cutting him off. Supreme Court ruled that students don't shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. West Virginia versus Barnette, 1943, government officials can't force people to abandon their beliefs just because they say so. A shift went through the room. She stepped forward, her voice even. What you did yesterday? Finding me for wearing a cross? That wasn't about courtroom decorum. That was about you deciding which personal symbols are acceptable and which aren't. And that, Your Honor, is unconstitutional. The judge's fingers twitched on the gavel. Ms. Bondi. Pam lifted a hand. Let me finish. Prescott's jaw clenched. You allow wedding bands, she continued. Lapel pins. Ribbons. I've seen attorneys in this very room wear American flag pins, political badges, even religious jewelry. But the second I walk in with a cross, suddenly it's a problem. Silence. And then movement. The reporters in the back were scribbling furiously. Someone's phone was up, recording. Pam turned, scanning the room. How many people in here are wearing something that represents a personal belief? Hands shifted. A few people exchanged glances. One attorney near the back adjusted his tie, and she knew he had some kind of pin hidden under the fold. Pam turned back to Prescott. So tell me, Judge, why is this different? Prescott's grip on the bench tightened. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer. That was the moment Pam knew she had him cornered. He could try to deflect. He could try to spin it. But this wasn't just a courtroom battle anymore. This was public. This was bigger than him. The tension stretched so thick you could cut it. And then boom. A voice from the gallery, low but clear. She's right. Pam didn't turn to see who said it. She didn't need to. The words had already landed. The judge exhaled slowly. Ms. Bondi, I'm not in the habit of debating courtroom policy with attorneys. No, you're in the habit of making up rules as you go, she shot back. A flicker of something crossed his face, frustration, maybe even regret. He could feel it slipping. Control. Power. Pam held his gaze. So what's it gonna be, Your Honor? You gonna find everyone wearing a wedding ring today? Or are you just gonna admit you overstepped? The entire room was waiting. Prescott's lips parted. And then for the first time since this started, he had nothing to say. When the judge got exposed, the silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Prescott's face was frozen in something between anger and panic, his knuckles white against the bench. He had no answer because there was none, not one that wouldn't make him look like a hypocrite. Pam Bondi just stood there, waiting. She didn't need to say anything else. She had already won this round, and they both knew it. But the real victory? It wasn't just the way she shut him down. It was how everyone in that room saw it happen. The murmurs started in the back of the courtroom, quiet at first. A rustle of movement. The shift of chairs. Then, a voice from the gallery, louder this time. She's got a point. Another one. He lets people wear flag pins all the time. Prescott gripped the edge of the bench, his jaw locked. That's enough. Pam didn't flinch. Is it? His eyes snapped to hers. You singled me out, she continued, voice calm but cutting. You tried to make an example out of me, but the only thing you did was prove your own double standard. And now you've got a room full of people who see right through it. Prescott's eyes darted toward the reporters, the court clerks, the attorneys still watching. The damage was done. Pam stepped back toward her table, slow and steady. She had just exposed him in his own courtroom, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. But then, he did something she didn't expect. He smirked. It was small, barely there, but it was enough. Enough for Pam to know that this wasn't over. Prescott sat back, adjusting his robe like he had just regained control of the room. Ms. Bondi, I suggest you focus on your case rather than making a spectacle of yourself. Pam let out a short laugh. A spectacle? No, Your Honor, you did that all on your own. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Prescott tapped his gavel, trying to reel everything back in. Enough. We're moving on. But Pam wasn't finished yet. She turned slightly, just enough for the courtroom to hear. For the record, Your Honor, I'll be filing a formal objection, and I suggest you get familiar with constitutional law before you try this again. Prescott's smirk flickered. Just for a second. That was all Pam needed, because this wasn't just about her anymore. The second she walked out of that courtroom, the real fight was about to begin. The judge's big mistake. Pam Bondi had barely stepped out of the courtroom when her phone buzzed. Incoming call, Lisa Reynolds. She exhaled. Of course the media was already on it. Pam, Lisa's voice came through the line, sharp and eager. What the hell just happened in there? Pam smirked, glancing back at the courtroom doors. Judge Prescott decided he's the fashion police now. Didn't like my cross. Lisa let out a low whistle. He fined you for it? Oh yeah. $500. Silence. Then Lisa laughed. Jesus. And he backed down the second I called him out, Pam said. But trust me, it's not over. She could feel it, like static in the air before a storm. Prescott wasn't the type to take a hit and move on. No, guys like him, they played dirty, and he was about to prove it. By the time Pam made it back to her office, the emails were already flooding in. Support. Outrage. Questions from reporters. And then, one subject line stopped her cold. Official notice. Bondi versus Florida bar complaint. Pam clicked it open. Her stomach tightened. Prescott had filed a formal complaint against her. Failure to adhere to courtroom decorum. Disruptive behavior. Lack of respect for judicial authority. Pam let out a slow breath. So that was his move. Retaliation. Not in open court, not in front of the cameras. No, he was trying to bury her in red tape, choke her out with bureaucratic nonsense. He wanted to make her the villain. Pam cracked her knuckles. Cute. She picked up her phone and dialed. Lisa answered instantly. Tell me you have something good. Oh, I do, Pam said. I just got hit with a complaint. Lisa didn't even sound surprised. From Prescott? Who else? Pam leaned back in her chair. He's trying to flip the script. Make it look like I'm the problem. Lisa's voice sharpened. This is a power move. He knows the press is watching, so he's trying to get ahead of the story. Pam grinned. Yeah? Well, he's about to learn how that works both ways. Lisa let out a low chuckle. I assume you're not planning to handle this quietly. Hell no. Pam swiveled in her chair, eyes already scanning her notes. Prescott thought he was untouchable. He thought she'd roll over, take the hit, and let the headlines turn against her. But he had seriously underestimated how far she was willing to take this fight. You gonna take it public? Lisa asked. Pam's grin widened. Oh, I'm gonna make sure everyone hears about it. This wasn't just about a fine anymore. This was war. The media firestorm Prescott never saw coming. Pam Bondi knew exactly how this was going to play out. Prescott thought he was in control, thought filing that complaint would shift the narrative, paint her as reckless, disrespectful, out of line. He had no idea who he was dealing with. By the next morning, the story had already exploded. Pam sat at her desk, coffee in hand, scrolling through headlines that were lighting up the internet like wildfire. Florida judge finds attorney over religious symbol, then tries to silence her. Pam Bondi faces backlash from the bench after calling out courtroom bias. Is this judicial overreach? Experts weigh in. The conservative networks were all over it. Legal analysts were dissecting every angle. Even the more neutral outlets were picking it up, hesitant but interested. And then, her phone rang. Lisa Reynolds. Again. Pam smirked and answered, "Morning." Lisa didn't waste time. "You seeing this?" "Oh yeah." Pam took a slow sip of coffee. Prescott really thought he could bury this. Lisa laughed. "Not anymore. You're all over the news. And get this, he hasn't made a statement yet." Pam leaned back in her chair. "That's because he's scrambling. He didn't expect pushback." Lisa's tone shifted. "Yeah, but you know what happens next, right?" Pam did. Prescott wasn't the kind of guy to take public humiliation lightly. And right on cue, an email popped up in her inbox. Official court statement. Judge Alan Prescott. Pam clicked it open, already bracing for the spin. The integrity of the courtroom must be upheld. While personal beliefs are respected, all attorneys must adhere to professional standards of decorum. Ms. Bondi's actions disrupted proceedings, and appropriate measures were taken to maintain order. Pam snorted. "Wow, that's cute." Lisa sighed. "He's playing the courtroom integrity card." Pam set her coffee down. "Yeah, and I'm about to rip it in half." She pulled up her Twitter account and started typing. "Integrity? You mean bias? I followed the law. Prescott didn't. And now he's backpedaling. Hard." She had sinned. Lisa let out a low whistle. "Damn, you're not pulling punches." "Why would I?" Pam said. "He wants to make this a public fight? Fine. Let's go public." And as her phone started blowing up again, as legal analysts and reporters dissected every word, Pam knew Prescott had lost control of the story. And she wasn't about to give it back. The judge's desperate move. Pam Bondi had seen power-hungry men crack before. The same pattern, every time. First, they dismissed you. Then, they tried to silence you. And when that didn't work, they went for the kill shot. Judge Alan Prescott had just reached that stage. Pam sat at her desk, flipping through the latest headlines when her phone lit up with an unknown number. She debated ignoring it, but instinct told her otherwise. She answered. "Ms. Bondi," a clipped voice said. "This is James Calloway with the Florida Bar Association." Pam leaned back. Well, what can I do for you?" There was a pause, hesitation, that told her everything she needed to know. "I wanted to inform you," Calloway finally said, "that a formal inquiry has been opened regarding your conduct in Judge Prescott's courtroom." Pam smirked. "There it is. And let me guess," she said, spinning a pin between her fingers. "The complaint was filed by Prescott himself?" Calloway hesitated again. "I'm not at liberty to discuss that." Pam laughed. "Right. Because it's totally normal for the Florida bar to launch an inquiry over an attorney wearing a piece of jewelry." Calloway exhaled. "Ms. Bondi, She cut him off. "Let me save you the trouble. This isn't about courtroom decorum. It's about Prescott realizing he screwed up and now trying to weaponize the system against me." Silence. Pam let it sit. Let him feel it. Then, finally, Calloway cleared his throat. "You'll be receiving a formal notice soon. I suggest you prepare accordingly." "Oh, don't worry," Pam said, voice steady. "I'm always prepared." She hung up. This was war now. Pam wasted no time dialing Lisa Reynolds. The reporter picked up instantly. "Talk to me," Lisa said. "They're coming for my license," Pam replied, her tone almost amused. Lisa cursed under her breath. "Prescott's that desperate?" "Looks like it." Pam grabbed her bag, already heading for the door. "So here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna run the story. We're not waiting for them to control the narrative." Lisa didn't hesitate. "You sure? This could get ugly." Pam laughed. "Lisa, it's already ugly." She stepped out into the Florida heat, the weight of the fight settling over her shoulders. Prescott thought he could use the system to crush her, but he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. Because Pam Bondi wasn't the one who was going to lose. The judge's fall. Pam Bondi didn't need a crystal ball to see how this would play out. Prescott thought he was pulling the strings, but in reality, he was hanging by them. By the time she stepped into Lisa Reynolds' office, the war had already spilled into national headlines. Judge who fined attorney for wearing a cross now under fire for abuse of power. Judicial tyranny? Florida judge accused of retaliation against attorney who called him out. Florida bar inquiry into Pam Bondi sparks national debate on religious freedom. Lisa was standing by the window, phone pressed to her ear. The second she saw Pam, she ended the call. "You ready for this?" Lisa asked, crossing her arms. Pam smirked. "Oh, I've been ready." Lisa nodded, pulling up her notes. Prescott finally broke his silence. "He gave a statement this morning." Pam raised an eyebrow. "And?" Lisa read off her screen, voice laced with amusement. "The integrity of the judiciary must be protected." This was never about religious expression, but about maintaining order in the courtroom. Pam laughed. Well, that's the best he could come up with. Oh, it gets better, Lisa said. Word is, the Florida Judicial Review Board is now reviewing his conduct. Pam's smile widened. That was the kill shot. Prescott thought he was the one dragging her through the mud. But now, the spotlight was fully on him. Pam sat down, tapping her fingers on the desk. So what's next? Lisa leaned in. Well, here's where it gets really fun. A few legal experts have been tearing apart his decision. They're saying this could set a precedent, one that completely undermines his credibility. Pam tilted her head. Meaning? Lisa grinned. Meaning, Prescott is about to become the face of judicial overreach. Pam exhaled, letting that sink in. A year from now, Prescott wouldn't be sitting on that bench. He wouldn't be silencing attorneys. Hell, he'd be lucky if he had a career left at all. Pam leaned back, a slow smile spreading across her face. So, Lisa said, closing her laptop. What do you want to do next? Pam didn't even hesitate. We let him bury himself. And as the world watched, that's exactly what he did. The judge who thought he was untouchable. Until he wasn't. Alan Prescott thought he could shut Pam Bondi down with a fine. Then, he tried to bury her with a complaint. But in the end, he was the one who got burned. His name became synonymous with judicial overreach. His actions sparked a national debate, and as pressure mounted, the Florida Judicial Review Board had no choice but to step in. The man who tried to silence her? Now he was the one answering for his own abuse of power. And Pam? She didn't just win. She set a new precedent. This is what happens when people stand their ground. If you don't want to miss the next jaw-dropping story, hit that subscribe button, smash that like, and turn on notifications. You won't believe what's coming next.